In Star Wars Episode II, Attack of the Clones, Anakin Skywalker famously says to Padme Amidala, "I don't like sand. It's coarse and rough and irritating, and it gets everywhere." Well, Anakin probably wouldn't be a fan of Thatgamecompany's 2012 Journey. There's sand everywhere. Nothing else around but rolling dunes of sand, for the vast majority of the game. Let's rewind for a second. Back to sometime around 2008. Jenova Chen, a Chinese video game designer, had moved to the States years prior to study interactive media at the University of Southern California. He was now wrapping up production on Flower, the second of 3 games his studio, Thatgamecompany, would have published by Sony. Zynga had recently exploded onto the scene. If you remember games on Facebook like Farmville, then you know Zynga. The company's CFO gave a bold proclamation at an industry conference that the future of gaming was social, and social in the manner that Zynga was doing it. He urged indie devs to abandon their passion projects and join the company. In an interview, Chen recounts, "Everybody was pissed. I felt their anger too. I was like, who are you? How can you say that you define social games?" For Chen, social meant creating genuine emotional connections between people, not just trading resources like vegetables back and forth on Farmville. It wasn't transactional. So, he set out to create a social game, Thatgamecompany's way. Matt Nava interviewed to join the team in 2008 and recounts describing a stark desert world inhabited by luminous, faceless, humanoid figures. There would be no text or dialogue to guide the player, but Austin Wintory's score would take on a narrative role, subtly guiding. Wintory wanted to avoid deliberate emotional manipulation, instead trying to compose music that allowed players to project their own meanings onto the experience. So, as you traverse the sandy world of Journey as a small humanoid figure in a red robe, there is a story unfurling. Journey tells a tale of the rise and fall of a civilization primarily through a series of engravings. Some are presented to the player by white-robed ancestors, and some are placed around the world. Here's a quick summary from Daniel Podgorski of the Gemsbach. In the first ancestor cutscene, one watches runic energy spew out of a mountain, scattering far and wide through the sky and down onto the surface of the planet, coalescing within bird-like animals, various plants, white-robed hominid-like bipeds, and finally enormous strips of cloth. One of the hidden panels implies that the robed figures engage in agricultural cultivation of the plants. In the second ancestor cutscene, one sees the first inklings of the biped's intellectual prowess. Architecture appears among them, and the potently energetic cloth material is run into aqueduct-like grooves in the structures, providing the buildings with an electricity-like power. Ruins of such buildings, some still containing cloth, now desiccated, are found periodically during the game. In the third, clouds of bird-like cloth fragments are now imprisoned within the architecture, and as the buildings swell with power, it depletes from the air above. Tall city buildings expand rapidly, replacing what had been vegetation. A pair of hidden panels reveal that in this era, large flying snake-like machines are created to carry the figures as they oversee their surroundings, and that such machines come to be mass-produced within the buildings. One automated assembly line for the heads of the machines is still moving towards the end of an early level. In the fourth, the once abundant cloth begins to dwindle, and the lights in the buildings flicker out. A pair of roped figures fight over a small scrap of cloth, ripping it in half and exhausting it. The engraving pans further, revealing organized groups of the figures engaged in combat with each other, on and around the mechanical snakes. A gargantuan flying machine blasts a large building apart. In the fifth, as lines of figures are left deceased by the combat, the wind drives crushed remains of the buildings mingled with the now plantless earth to create piles of sand that bury all. Beneath the rescattered energy in the desert sky, a shooting star falls and a red-robed figure is thereby born among the gravestones. In the sixth, the red-robed figure from the previous scene is confirmed to be the player character, as their exact journey across the game's chapters is depicted step by step, including their erstwhile accompaniment by a second red-robed figure where applicable. This engraving depicting the campaign is thorough, even showing an event that hasn't happened yet, the player character being buffeted by wind without reaching the summit of the mountain. In the seventh and final cutscene with the ancestors, the player character fulfills the end of the last engraving by dying in the frigid wind and collapsing in the snow. Their death at this moment, however, is not actually confirmed until the very end of the game, when the camera zooms in on a new tombstone forming in that section of the mountainside, just as its glow fades. At any rate, what we see happen next is the red-robed figure awaken with full vigor in the dreamlike realm, where they had interacted with the ancestors through meditation. They then glow gold and explode into the air, flying all the way to the crevice at the peak, their energy having returned to the mountain. A runic shooting star flies out of it and into the desert, there to give birth to another red-robed figure to begin the journey anew, and on, potentially into eternity. Now, that might seem like a bit of a downer, but what about all the precious moments in between? Well, remember how I said this was supposed to be a social game? Basically, there's a seamless drop-in system, so when possible, a player is paired with one other player to navigate the world with. When players approach each other, they charge each other's scarves, where their energy is stored. They can't communicate with each other beyond patterns of singing. There's no way for one player to really hinder or be a detriment to the other, and being in a duo isn't necessary for completing any of the stages. So all interactions would be neutral at worst, or actively cooperative and mutually beneficial. They can help each other by activating strips of cloth or showing paths, and if any two finish a section at the same time, they will remain together into the next one. Jumping back to another excerpt from Podgorski for a minute here. Ultimately, what Flower never confronts is the notion raised by Journey, that a planet being hospitable to diverse forms of life is not a resilient guarantee. Ours wasn't always so, and will become similarly unfit again at some arbitrarily far future date. The only variables are how soon that future comes, and to what degree humanity accelerates its onset. Sooner than that will be the date the planet becomes unfit to support human life, and for those of us who aren't entirely misanthropic, the degree to which that's a date whose arrival we're accelerating is also a topic of considerable concern. Don't get me wrong, Journey is optimistic as well, but it is so on a much smaller and more muted scale. It says that even in a likely hell of our own making, there is the possibility of cooperation, learning, and beauty. It's overwhelmingly tranquil and pleasant, even uplifting. The red robes don't perpetuate this cycle arbitrarily or under orders, they do it because their lives are worthwhile. Surfing down slopes or dunes, learning their history, gliding through the air, assisting one another, and freeing trapped cloth are experiences that fill their lives with adventure, intrigue, and joy. This is communicated to the player through the bright, relaxing music throughout, the playful dance-like animations that accompany their flying and singing, and the rich golden art style of many of the desert chapters. They aren't stultified by the sand. They want existence to go on, and for that to happen, as they learn from the white robes along the way, they must make their journeys. End quote. And how much more beautiful and meaningful and just full a journey can become when accompanied by another, that was the kind of social Chen and the team were after. Anyways, thanks so much for joining me here, and thank you as always for being a part of this little ecosystem.